Yeah, I'll just go through a couple of ideas that I think is important from, because what we did last Saturday was Lynn and Helga LaRouche basically did what Phil did now, setting the stage for the 12-hour conference concerning, as Helga said, we are hanging in a very, very thin thread. And Helga is a very optimistic lady, and she said, look, we need to have a miracle because that's how dangerous the situation is now. And I have worked with LaRouche since 1975, and I can't see a situation that is, because it's so complex and so many things that can go wrong and take a life on its own, as Phil went through. So what the conference concentrated on, as Michael Steger, one of the young policy committee members, said, he said, look, this conference is about the future. But I want to go through just a few ideas, because as Phil said, there's no way, I would recommend, there's no way that we can just, and then this person said that, and then this person said that. You should go as soon, it's being worked on right now to put all the speeches up on the Paradigm, Schiller Institute Paradigm website, and then you can go in and watch for yourself. I just want to go through some key ideas, because we are really being seen in Asia and throughout the world, but I'll focus in on Asia now. The LaRouche movement in the United States is really being looked upon as the only hope, and the more we can shift the situation here, the more there will be an echo in the rest of the world, and very much in Asia, where there is a lot of propaganda, for example, in China against the United States. There's the same as you have a lot of propaganda here in the United States against China. I think all of you have heard that the Chinese are really bad, right?
I thought they're supposed to be united with Russia.
Yeah, but there's a lot of propaganda against the Chinese in the United States. I get it all the time about how bad the Chinese are. No, I know it's not true. but so one of the things I want, this is known to all of you here, I think, our proposal for a world land bridge, where all the blue lines, I think it's very important to emphasize, is like not just railroads, but it's 150 kilometers, 100 miles broad band of development, of new cities, of power generation, water management, and so forth, where we simply will be able to, when we have corridors spanning all over, we'll be able to develop the land around, we'll be able to get the resources out, process them, and transport them, and we'll basically make the whole planet alive. And that program is an American system program to its core. It's anti-colonial, it's anti-empire. And one of the things that struck me when I was growing up in Europe, and in Europe you have all the different countries have been in wars earlier, set up by the wars created by imperial policies. So you have the Danes and the Swedes, they didn't get along. The French and the Germans, the Poles and the Germans, the Poles and the Russians. And I could go on because it's all the old wars, so there's a lot of fault lines in Europe. And then when I started going to Asia, I realized, wow, it's the same thing. The Japanese and the Chinese, the Russians and the Japanese, the Chinese and the Indians, the Japanese and the Koreans. There's a lot of tensions and fault line in Asia. That is all has been created through the years by the imperial policies. Set the nations up against each other, and you can sit outside of control the whole situation. So what our program is completely opposed to that of colonialism. It is based on the Westphalian principle from 1648. That is that your development is in my interest, the benefit of mutual development. And the idea is that all the nations collaborate on a common principle for mutual development, and that is the basis for peace. And this is not a new idea, this is an old idea. And this has also always been a nightmare for the imperial forces. Adam Brooks wrote a book in 1901 where he said, we must make sure that the land people, that the European and the Asians never succeed in developing the land in between. Because if they succeed, then we, the maritime powers, will have lost our power forever. So the efforts now, you probably heard about the air-sea battle strategy from the United States, where they want to involve Japan and the Philippines, Australia, all in an encirclement against China. And it is an effort to make sure that mankind gets reduced in population, as Phil pointed out earlier. I wanted to just read you a couple of quotes from yesterday's briefing, just to kind of underline what the oligarchy wants. Paul Ehrlich, who is a fellow of the British Royal Society, author of The Population Bomb, he wrote the following in April 2012. This was a comment to the London Guardian on the need to reduce population. Okay, here we go. How many you support depends on lifestyles. We came up with 1.5 to 2 billion because you can have big active cities and wilderness. If you want a battery chicken world where everyone has minimum space and food and everyone is kept just about alive, you might be able to support in the long term about 4 to 5 billion people. But you already have 7 billion. So we have to humanely and as rapidly as possible move to population shrinkage. The question is, can you go over the top without a disaster, like a worldwide plague or a nuclear war between India and Pakistan? If we go on at the pace we are, there's going to be various forms of disaster. Some may be slow motion disasters, like people getting more and more hungry, or catastrophic disasters because the more people you have, the greater the chance of some weird virus transferring from animal to human populations. There could be a vast die-off. That was from April of last year. Or just one more from the Club of Rome, a fellow from there. From 1991, the first global revolution, quote, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. But in designating them as the enemy, we fall into the trap of mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself." So just to put, this is what we are dealing with. And LaRouche has been very emphatic in the last several months that our policy, that the new future and our policy, key policy for the future, lies in the Pacific. That this will be the center for the next century to come. One of the main reasons, one thing is, when LaRouche said, look west and go west, young man, is because of the collapse of the transatlantic system. But more importantly is that when we look at this area here, we are looking at half the world's population. If you combine half the world's population with a revived or totally changed United States with Glass-Steagall and the American way of doing things, the real American way of doing things regarding development, then we could have, oh, what's going on? Oops. Then we could have a development that we would never even ever could imagine. We can feed hundreds of billions of people with thermonuclear fusion development in the future. And I'm not going to go in a long speech about that, but that's what we are looking at. The key point I wanted to make was that this policy is an anti-oligarchical policy, and all those things that pops up in the press regarding anti-China, anti-Russia, and so forth are being played together. Of course, you have the puppet Obama, who's just a Brit. People talk about his birth certificate. It doesn't matter. He's not American. I mean, he is a British puppet. And what they are looking for in China, in India, in Russia, in the Philippines, in Thailand, and so on, looking towards LaRouche, looking towards what is the real America? Is there, what is the LaRouche organization doing? Because that is the only hope they know, intelligent thinking people, they know that the only hope for their countries is a total shift in the United States. And that is what we represent. And I think when you go out in the streets and organize here in New York, you have to have that sense that you are working and organizing not just for the United States, but in doing so you are organizing for a change for the entire world. There's no way that Africa can be gotten rid of colonialism. There's no way in which China and Russia and India can succeed without us having a profound shift back to what America represented. And that is what I want to show. I want to get back to China a little bit, but I want to show you a speech that a Chinese friend of ours gave in at the conference. And whoops, oh, what am I doing now? Here we go. His name is Mr. Ding, and let me just get him up here. Okay, I'll pause it. So he met us in Paris years ago. He worked for the Xinhua news agency, which is officially connected to the Chinese government. That is, if you work there, this is official. You are being allowed to be broadcast into China Daily, People's Daily, and so forth. And so he had met us there, and he had worked with our leadership in France, and he came to the United States, and he has met with Linda LaRouche and followed us. And there might be a couple of you here that don't know, but we have worked on the Eurasian land bridge since 1989. See, what happened was that in 1988, LaRouche gave an incredible speech in West Berlin, like a historic speech, and I would recommend people to go back and look at it today, actually, in where he said, he called for the reunification of Germany. The wall was up in Europe. The Soviet Union was Soviet Union. You had East Germany and West Germany. And here you have LaRouche in 1988 calling for the reunification of the two Germanys and saying that this should be used to develop Poland and other points east. And and he says, I know that what I'm saying here will be studied very carefully in Moscow in a couple of hours. And he also had a map at that meeting that he pulled down, and he said, when we have such a reunification of Germany, Great Britain is going to try to prevent it from being good by starting a war in the Balkans. So a year later, the wall came down, and the British started a war in the Balkans. What Helga LaRouche did, because LaRouche at that time was in jail a year later, what Helga LaRouche did in close collaboration with Leni in jail was she started a proposal for building the European triangle between key centers in Europe, the most densely developed, industrial developed area with know-how in the world. And then from there, our idea of the Eurasian land bridge expanded. And in 1992, we had for the first time a cover of the EIR with the Eurasian land bridge. And we had many, many conferences. We had, I personally have been involved in it tremendously, many, many meetings to make the idea better and better and better. And so I'm saying that before I start with Mr. Ding here. He has a heavy accent, so but you're New Yorker, so you're used to listening to accents, right? So just, you'll get the sense of it. Oh, what happened?
There it goes.
Oh, okay. The state council is like the government. Top. Oh, that's no sound.
Wait, stop. You can turn the speaker on.
There you go.
And that company invested heavily in coastal. China had a very fast economic growth for several years, but with the international financial crisis, we had a lot of
You can't see
difficulties
him.
because multinational companies invested heavily in coastal areas in China. So that dragged the growth and that enlarged the Chinese government fiscal revenues. And Chinese government invested a lot in infrastructure construction that improved the environment in coastal areas. So attracted more investment in this area. But with the financial crisis, the external market is shrinking. So China export is declining. Chinese government decided to shift the economy, the focus of economic growth towards domestic market. So we had to invest heavily and massively in central and western part of China, especially in infrastructure construction, in order to improve this region and to reduce the regional disparity between different regions in China. Also because labor costs and all kind of costs in coastal regions are rising, so the processing trade is no longer sustainable in coastal regions. So there is a dislocation in China. So some industries are moving from coastal areas to central and western part of China. As the central and western part of China is far from the sea lines, from the coastal area, so the sea transport cost is rising. China has invested in railroad construction in central and eastern part of China in order to connect these regions with Central Asia and Europe. So far, China has constructed 3 land bridges which were connected to the Central Asia and Europe. First one is the land bridge, the North Land Bridge, that goes across Russia and to Europe. And the second land bridge started from Xi'an and Chongqing, and goes through Central Asia countries through Kazakhstan and so on, and goes to Europe. And third land bridge goes through Myanmar and India, Iran, and Turkey to Europe. With those three final railroads, China's central and western part are connected to Central Asia and the European market. So the transport cost is a little bit higher than sea transport, but the transport is much faster than sea line transport and is less expensive than air transport. So the railroads is essential in shipping all these products from central and western part of China towards Europe. So when the Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Central Asia countries and Russia, he talked about the new Silk Road project. That means that China will invest along those railroads to make those regions economically prosperous. Actually, China, Russia, and Central Asia countries are members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They were committed to the cooperation in fighting with religious extremists, separatists, and terrorists. And then in these areas, they made tremendous progress. But China realized that poverty is something that is favorable to the rise of these extremists and the separatists in this region. So to get rid of these religious extremists, separatists, and terrorists, it's essential to let those regions take advantage of the economic development and prosperity. So China will invest massively in this region to try to help those regions have a sound economic development and to make these people more happier with their new life. And that could be very helpful to in the fight against all these forces in the region. Also, because since the crisis, some sectors in Chinese economy are facing overcapacities. So China needs to find new channels to invest and even to absorb these overcapacities. So those economic cooperation with Central Asia countries would be very helpful for China to enlarge Chinese investment in this region and to some extent to absorb Chinese overcapacity. Actually, my last point concerns China, Russia, and Central Asia's cooperation in this region. And this kind of cooperation could change the picture of world economy. I think that Mr. LaRouche talked about the land bridge, about the Eurasia land bridge many years ago. But his analysis is often ahead of the event, ahead of the development. So sometimes people only realize the importance of his assessment or of his forecast several years after his projection. But his projection is often proven very right. So this time, I think the new Silk Road has proven once more LaRouche's right in those Chinese efforts to combine economic development efforts and economic cooperation along with Central Asia countries and Russia, and then to make these Eurasia land bridge a vital development line for China, also for the region. Feels more pressure from Japan, from kind of military alliance of the United States and Japan. So the pressure comes also from southeast part. While the Silk Road is a big background for China to have some provisions on energy, on resources for Chinese development, and by railroads, China can have access to the European market. So we have market, we have provision of energy and other resources. So even this time, when the threat comes from the southeastern part, China can resist with this background support.
So what, actually let me take another picture.
No, I get it.
So just to hone in a little bit on China, because if you look at US without Alaska and China, it's somewhat similar, except that China has much bigger mountain ranges, much higher mountain ranges than the United States. And there's a couple of other differences, but a big difference is that the United States is a continental nation, where China here have Central Asia. And it's different going south too. I just wanted to show you that and then go back to the land bridge picture. Because when we think about doing it with the intention as Americans, then think about John Quincy Adams, who made sure that the United States became a continental nation. He was single-handedly the man that did that. What he also did, he formed and was part of forming an organization in 1812 for foreign missionaries to go to Asia. And the idea was in 1812, and the idea, he was, you had a situation with the Battle of Britain, who again tried to take over the United States and control the United States. You had Napoleon being urged to go against Russia, who has been the best ally of the United States. So he and John Jay and others formed this board, a commission of foreign missionaries to not only cross the United States, but also go all across the Pacific to, not so much to Christianize people in Asia, but to, with the other, to spread the word of what were the key principles upon which the United States was founded, and as a key counter to the British. If it hadn't been for these efforts, Hawaii today would have been one of the places controlled by the British. It's a long story. And there was a great impact in Japan, in Thailand, and other places by these Americans. But an absolutely crucial place was China. So that's, because and then you had later, you had Lincoln and the Transcontinental Railroad making sure to develop a whole nation, connect the nation with the Transcontinental Railroad. Let me give you another picture here, because one of the key guys that came out, I want to try now to the similarities between China and the United States, and why China and the United States are natural allies concerning ideas and of course what is in our mutual interest. But this is Sun Yat-sen, and one of the key figures that came out of this missionary work started by John Quincy Adams and others, was Sun Yat-sen, who converted to Christianity. He was educated as a doctor in Hong Kong at a university that was built by those missionaries. And he studied the United States intensely. And he single-handedly decided when he was 18 years old, because of the horrendous situation in China, that the emperor had to go, that we had to have a Republic of China. So he traveled the world. I could talk about this for 2 hours, but I'll just make it a few minutes. He traveled the world around the world 6 times, raising money. He was the key top fundraiser for the Chinese Revolution. If it hadn't been for the funds that he raised, the world would have looked very different today. He organized military academies in all the major cities in the United States to train Chinese officers. There was a military academy here in Chinatown in New York. There was one in Los Angeles. There was one in San Francisco. And 2,100 Chinese officers were smuggled into China through different routes. And if it hadn't been for these trained officers, it's very doubtful that they could have won the revolution. But anyway, this is a long, exciting, courageous history. He was a total admirer of Lincoln. And he kept talking about Lincoln again and again. And he wrote, he did, because of his intent and his commitment, and he learned from the very best from the United States, he succeeded. And he did everything. It was not just overthrowing the emperor, but he then wrote a paper called San Min Ju Yi, the 3 Principles of the People, which was modeled upon of the people, by the people, and for the people, inspired by Lincoln. And he was going out giving lectures to people around around in China around those principles to educate, and then it was written down and it was issued into a book. What he also did after the First World War, when he saw the Versailles Treaty, he said, we are going to have a Second World War. This is an awful so-called peace treaty. And he wrote in 1919, just after the Versailles Treaty, he wrote in English a program called On the International Development of China, which is the Eurasian land bridge that is our program today. We have more developed it because of the new technologies and so forth, but we took Sun Yat-sen's program in 1996 and upgraded it. The routes that we had, the development corridors for Africa, are the same routes that Dr. Sun Yat-sen had in China. He wanted to build 5 new harbors. He wanted to crisscross China with railroads, water management. The 3 Gorges Dam was his proposal, Sun Yat-sen's proposal from 1919. So what he did, he wrote in the preface to this 1919 program, and this is very similar to what we are doing today. He wrote that the reason I'm sending out this development program to you, he sent it out to key governments all over the world. He said, the reason I'm sending this out to you is that this is a program for peace. And unless my program is adopted, we are going to have a Second World War. That was Sun Yat-sen in 1919, learning from the very best of the United States, from the missionaries from way back from John Quincy Adams, going further back to Cotton Mather to do good, to Lincoln, and by the way, the answer from the United States was, we can't afford it. They answered him back, his proposal. But you had a gentleman called Walter Rathenau in Germany, who was the foreign minister in Germany, who immediately sent people to Shanghai to collaborate with Sun Yat-sen's people there. He loved the proposal. And of course, as Phil pointed out, Rathenau was a good guy, so he was assassinated in 1922. But I wanted to, what Sun Yat-sen also did is that he he combined the very best in the United States with the very best in China of Chinese philosophy, and that is Confucius. And also here, it's going to be very superficial, but Confucius says that Confucius lived 100 years before Plato. And what he said was that the universe is lawfully ordered, and it constantly develops. That the sun and the moon, they know which routes to take, and they don't make a mistake. And he says, Confucius said that man must participate together with the universe to take care of the planet. And he said every single one of us are born with specific capabilities that are unique to human beings. That is innate qualities. Capacity for love on a higher level, and also capacity for justice, capacity for knowledge, and so forth. But the highest is love. If you don't have love, you have nothing, which is very similar to one of the most beautiful things from Christianity concerning if you don't have charity, if you don't have that kind of love, you are empty, you are nothing. Also, a very big emphasis from Confucius was the development of the creative powers of man. So Sun Yat-sen would take those ideas from Confucius and use them, connect them directly with the ideas from Lincoln and from the United States in the work that he did. And I'm going through this because there is such if you take the most beautiful ideas of man that has been developed in Russia, in China, in the United States, in Europe. I was kind of, when I was studying Confucius for the first time, I was kind of, wow, he must be Western. No, he's Chinese, because I had the Chinese on the top and then I had notes in translation at the bottom. And because for me it was very Western, what I had grown up with in Europe. So if we take the most beautiful ideas about man and man's relationship to the universe, they are the same. If they're anti-oligarchical and if they are for man, they're the same. They're just being put with a little different explanation. I forgot a very important point, because Confucius also say that it is your duty to develop those innate capabilities, and you must develop them to the utmost. And he says the only way you can do it is if you have no deceit. And we all know that you can easily fool other people, but you know yourself if you're not truthful. I mean, if you are cheating, you kind of know that. And Confucius say, if you cheat, if you're not truthful, you cannot develop your capabilities, these innate capabilities for love, justice, knowledge, and so forth. And he says, but if you do that, then you as man can participate together with the universe and the earth in the continued development process. That's Confucius. So, and that is very much in the different Asian nations and very much in China, some of the most beautiful cultural past for us to draw upon for today. So I wanted to make sure that Sun Yat-sen, you should know too, is being taken up. He's being revived in China today. Confucius is being revived in China today because it's lawful. Now China is on a path for development that they are taking the very best from the past and using it this now in modern times. So let me just give you a sentence idea. This one. You're welcome. Some of you have probably seen it because I've used it a lot. Other people have used it. This was a stamp that was issued in 1942 to raise money. And you can see in the back you have China, a map of China, and then you have Lincoln and Sun Yat-sen. And the Chinese underneath is of the people, by the people, and for the people. So if you get an idea of the United States, Roosevelt's United States in 1942, that you had people that had a very clear idea of the affinity between China and US, And LaRouche said in 2007 at a conference in Los Angeles, he said, the Chinese and the Americans are inseparable. The only thing they need to do now is to get married. And what Sun Yat-sen pointed out, because there's always been an effort from the empire to destroy the United States, to destroy Europe, to destroy China, you know, with the Opium Wars, you know, how the British supported the Confederacy, the Confederate South, and with the effort to make sure that China would not succeed, because there was an effort to split China up in a communist north and a Kuomintang south, and then you could split the nation up in all kinds of entities. And Sun Yat-sen sends an urgent appeal to America, to patriots in America at the time. He said, look, you went through the same thing. The idea was for the South to win, and then you have split up the nation, and then America would be split up in many different entities. That's what they're trying to do to China now. So help us, America. So I think that's the main point I wanted to make, that when people are reading articles, listening to things, news broadcasts and whatever, always to have the idea about what the manipulation is from the empire. That it is in all nations' interest to collaborate together around mutual development. And that is the basis for peace. That we can take the most beautiful ideas from the different nations around man, and that is what we collaborate around. And we can have a prosperity which I think is, we cannot even imagine today, because when we first have a total shift, it doesn't go like that. The development will go like that. It will accelerate in that kind of a way. So, and that is what we represent. You've seen how fast it could go when we were not hindered, and you can then imagine with a collaboration with US, China, Russia, and India, if we had that for the good, and not what the quotes I read concern the oligarchy's policy for killing people, how fast we can go, and how it's only politics. It's absolutely feasible to have a beautiful future for hundreds and hundreds of years to go for mankind, if it is so that we stand out oligarchism. And that is, the crisis is really so now, that's why it is so dangerous, that it is in this period, when all of us here in this room are alive, we are going to have one way or the other, and we have to make sure it goes our way. So I actually should show you, I should show you, we had a great ally in the Second World War, which was the Philippines. Thousands and thousands of Philippines gave their lives and worked very closely with Douglas MacArthur to first delay and then defeat the Japanese. And our man in the Philippines, Butch Valdez, gave a speech also at the Los Angeles conference. So I'll just let him speak, and then we can take questions and so forth. Yes, I actually want to say one thing after his speech. And then, okay, so here we go. Butch Valdez.
Recently, in the last 2.5 months in the Philippines, we've been struck by events which might aptly be considered the perfect storm. In an unexpected turn of events, the biggest corruption scandal in history of this country, involving no less than the president and practically the whole legislature, congressmen and senators alike, as disclosed by whistleblowers, has resulted in a spontaneous uproar from all sectors of society and a massive protest rally at the Luneta Manila Park in Manila followed. Almost simultaneously, a band of 400 to 500 heavily armed renegade soldiers, allegedly from a coalition of secession groups called the Muslim National Liberation Front, or the MNLF, enter and occupy Zamboanga, a major city in southern Philippines, and declares independence from the Republic of the Philippines. Furthermore, heavy rains and storms pummeled many parts of the country, causing devastating floods, destroying lives, homes, agricultural crops, disrupting commerce, and widespread power outages in the whole of Luzon ensued, costing the country in the hundreds of billions. Possibly the coup de grace was last week's earthquake in central Philippines, mainly hitting the islands of Cebu, Bohol, many other neighboring provinces. Damages to property, infrastructure, crops, commerce estimated run up to trillions of pesos, not counting loss of lives, homes, and jobs of the affected population. It was immediately after this last earthquake and what seemed like being kicked in the head while we were down and in pain, that President Aquino, on a prior scheduled state visit, as they say, flew to South Korea to incidentally purchase 12 fighter planes. Certainly, this is not to improve our capability to airdrop relief goods to flood and earthquake victims. But officially, we are told this purchase was made to increase our capability to defend our territories from imminent threats and possible invasion from China. So is the sorry state of Philippine affairs, and the sorrier state of mind of Philippine leadership. But so too are the challenges that Philippine LaRouche Society and the associated Save the Nation movement are confronted with. Despite the calamities that continue to plague our nation, and though the years of deterioration of the conditions of life have obviously exacted their heavy toll, our organization, through the weekly radio program, more frequent TV radio interviews, participation in rallies and demonstrations, and continued distribution of written material, has made significant inroads and impact on the important sectors of society. This has undoubtedly encouraged members of the Philippine LaRouche Society to more vigorously, militantly, and openly discuss issues beyond the local and beyond the popular. Though we consider the legally questionable presence of the U.S. military armed warships here in the Philippine waters, as a principal concern, the general public has not caught on to the fact that the pre-positioning of the U.S. naval forces in the Southeast Asian region started in the early part of 2012, with the Philippine President Aquino being told by Obama that the Subic Bay ports, airports, and other facilities should be available to the U.S. military if and when they are needed. To this demand, Aquino readily obeyed, even if he would clearly violate the Philippine Constitution, and will bypass the required ratification of the Senate, as well as a referendum for the people's consent. It was early 2012 too that President Aquino directed a prostituted Congress to impeach the Supreme Court Chief Justice on trumped-up charges, manufactured evidences, and the flimsiest of reasons. So much for checks and balances of a fraudulent democracy. And for being an obedient boy, Aquino was given a cutter-class Navy ship and a promise to help beef up the Philippine military as we prepare to be used as pawns in instigating anti-China sentiments among the patriotic Filipinos. To the less familiar, it should be understood that the current president, then a young kid in the early 70s, was reportedly psychologically affected by the very volatile political environment in which his father, the late Ninoy Aquino, the principal Marcos opponent, was accused of trying to overthrow the president. Reportedly, under the care of psychiatrists, young Noynoy, who preferred to be alone, was never presented to public and to media as prominently as was his smarter and younger sister. Some suspect that it may have been during these trying periods of being solitary that toys such as PlayStation games given to him started his keen talent for the sport, which eventually evolved into more sophisticated computer games. He later on, in the 90s, developed a passion for guns and a variety of weapons which attracted other friends, other gun enthusiasts, who now, not surprisingly, comprise much of his governing cabinet. Lyndon LaRouche once said, in answer to a question I asked about my country, "The Philippines does not have leaders. It had presidents, but not leaders." The response has haunted us in the organization for the past decade and a half. Indeed, the absence of intellectual competence and moral courage are qualities sorely absent among our current inventory of politicians. But the dearth of true leaders has not been any more distinctive and critical as it is today. One cannot help but be apprehensive when the president of a nation of 95 million people is a bachelor at 56 years old, incapable of holding a normal relationship, a passionate gun enthusiast, an expert in computer shooting games, and had just bought a dozen warplanes. Is he like a 5-year-old kid who may have inadvertently gotten his little hands on his dad's .45? Or worse, is he something like a major disaster about to happen, akin to Columbine, but on a much, much greater scale? Whatever he is definitely Obama's kind of guy. Beware, world. Here they come.
Oh, wow. So, I hope it gives you a little blood on the tooth, as they say in Denmark, to watch more from the proceedings from last Saturday. I want to end by taking up the end what Butch, namely the importance of thinking leaders, because everyone in this room represents Leni Rubinstein and a patriotic force in the United States. And I would really recommend people to, apart from the latest articles by LaRouche, also to, when the conference is up, to make sure to listen to Megan Beats and Phil Rubinstein's presentations. Phil gave a presentation which I thought of a lot later, and I'm not saying because he's my husband, but the theme for his discussion, what he did, was to discuss the strategic necessity of creativity. And if we go back to the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The question about the pursuit of happiness is not to be happy. That form of happiness is wisdom. And it was inspired by Leibniz's paper on felicity, on happiness. That is, like, you have love on a higher level, you have happiness on another level, if you think in terms of wisdom. And that is what is uniquely our strengths as human beings, not being slaves, not being subjects, but being republicans. I mean, republicans concerning people living in a republic and being true patriots. And it's really not possible to be a good patriot without using all your capabilities for learning and gaining insight. And LaRouche's latest papers are all regarding the quality of mind of what is necessary for people to take leadership in this period. And everyone you meet around you when you go out in the street and deploy and so forth, that kind of special quality is what is needed to create the miracle that Helga called for us to create last Saturday in order for this world to make it. And the power of the mind is very special, very unique. So I think I'll end here so we can have some discussion. Yes, Phil?
Well, doesn't the British oligarchy realize that if there should be a nuclear war, they'll go down too? They won't escape, you know, that it'll be the end of them also. Don't they have this in mind? I mean, I'm just wondering about this.
Well, the problem you have, what Phil went through when he talked in the beginning, is that you have a combination. They want population reduction and they want control. They think they can sit and play with it. Where you have the extreme danger is that the situation is so complex. Like you look at what Butch said with the Philippines, a war now can be started in many, many different ways. I want to, yeah, let's just stay with there, take further discussion. It's like playing the chicken game. Yeah.
Yes, how are we going to develop this program?
The absolute number one is that we get Glass-Steagall here and we get Obama out. We are followed so closely. There's nothing that Chinese, the Indians and the Russians can do without us clearing up here, because if you think about it, here the most powerful nation in the world is a British puppet. It's a puppet for the oligarchy, puppet for colonialism, puppet for everything evil. It's the absolute opposite of what the United States represent, and the United States represents that today in the world, being a puppet. So we have the absolute key thing. We have the Chinese will do what they are doing, and they are very busy now with India and Russia. One meeting after the other. Actually, right now, this weekend, there's another meeting where there are constant dialogue now to not just have a pro forma collaboration, but a real collaboration. The key, what we need to do is to clean up here. And that's why I began at the fight here is in a very direct sense a fight for the world. And therefore people should be excited about being here. No, I mean that what you do here will be have the most direct influence for generations to come. But it is that serious. And I was at a conference last November in China, and there was the most wildest invitation because several times they wrote to me, the conference organizers, that they thought it was so important that I would be there as a representative for LaRouche because they needed non-mainstream representative. And he said, Linda LaRouche is a non-mainstream representative, that's why you have to come. And there was a lot of scumbags, American and British scumbags at this conference, and I was the only non-mainstream. But what was interesting to me, the way it's functioning, the entire, all the people, the Chinese people there that came from all over China, they all knew Linda LaRouche. A couple of them, when I was introducing myself, would then say in Chinese, Schiller Institute, oh, the Schiller Institute. I would say Executive Intelligence Review and Leni Rubinstein, and they will say, think about the Schiller Institute because Helga LaRouche has been there several times as the Schiller Institute. Two people, independently of each other, bragged that they had met Linda LaRouche in China, which is not true because LaRouche has not been allowed to go to China because of the State Department. So, but the way it's functioning is the Chinese read a lot, which is really great. They read more than the Europeans, that read more than the Americans. So when you send something to Chinese people, they read it. And so the elite in China, all the intellectuals in the different universities and so forth, they know Linda LaRouche. That's kind of how it's functioning. So they will do their work. They're doing their study, like Mr. Ding. We have to clean up here. That's what we have to do. Yeah.
Can we get the elite to convince Obama?
Nah.
No?
We have to get the American people to create an uproar. And it's going to be, if you think about what it really means with the NSA, the Obamacare, the craziness now with the food stamps, all the stuff that Phil went through, think about that as a live process and what that does to the population. And that's where you come out as a voice, what we need to do. And we need to have that breaking point. And that has been done before in history, and we have to do it now.
Leni,
Yes.
I think what you're saying and so forth, going back to what you keep talking about and so forth, what we keep bringing up, the idea of what the British have been all about in killing people and so forth. Basically, it's like, I always see it as Lynn keeps saying, we're at war. And whether or not it's a shooting war or not, whether you're on the battlefield of World War I, World War II, and mortars are flying everywhere and people are dropping and so forth. With the death of Kennedy and all these people and so forth, the population's got to think in terms of rallying and continuing the fight. Because to take Kennedy away and so forth and so on is basically to scare the population into submission. And then they got to think in terms of that well, this person was here, now he's gone, but we got to rally together and move ahead, because it's about basically the nation. It's about the nation.
I think that one of the things I've found is that Americans that were born in America take America for too granted too. And I would suggest maybe people tonight or tomorrow get out the Declaration of Independence and read it aloud at the dinner table. The whole thing, not just the beginning, but the whole thing. and then take the preamble to the Constitution and really think about what that means, because it's opposite today. And those principles upon which the United States was founded goes for every single child and unborn for ages to come. Those principles are for every single human on this planet. And every time that has been a strength in that area, destroy it. That is what so what we are up against, what we are up against is oligarchical thinking, oligarchical view of man, imperial oligarchical evil, which regard man as an animal. They regard themselves as animals. I mean, they just think they're a little bit better like racehorses. When the Danish queen, they had to promote the race, the royal race. But they were too intermarried, so they had special people running around in Europe to find a stud for her. So they found this. Count, this French count. So his blood was fine and so forth. So they imported him into Denmark, so he could give her some babies, and he was made into a prince to just get some fresh blood. They really do think about themselves as animals, and they have no idea. That's also they have no. It would be impossible for an imperial thinker and an oligarch to think about any solutions, because their mind is not like that. It's the same thing that you cannot really be creative unless you have a compassion for mankind, a compassion for your fellow human being. You cannot be creative. You can go to universities till you die and study for 12 hours every day, and there will not come a genuine idea out of you. Without love, without compassion. And since they don't have that, and they regard themselves as animals, that is what we are up against. And there's been now an effort for thousands of years. People in different Renaissance periods and so forth, we have been up against this oligarchical view of man and empire. And we are in a situation now where it's a very, I don't know what LaRouche would say, but I think it's a final battle because of the way the world is now. That the oligarchy has to be wiped out, because we are going to go to the stars and we are going to carry mankind ahead. Yes?
One thing, in terms of what Fred said, I think there's a way of putting it which gets at the point in the sense that we're in a war.
Why don't you come up here?
Well, we're in a war. There is a war going on. The problem is most American population doesn't get it. So they say, it's sort of as though you had Pearl Harbor and nobody signed up. You know, when Pearl Harbor hit, people went down and they were ready, they enlisted, or maybe they were drafted a little bit later on, but there was a sense, okay, we've been drafted, we've been enlisted. Now you have a situation where there's a war being run against the United States, against the population, against the world. And the Americans are trying to treat it like it's not there. I mean, if I can find a cubby hole to crawl into, and with tuna fish and dried eggs and God knows what, and we'll survive. We'll survive. Look, one way, I know that Lynn addressed this today, and I'm sure there's a good deal that'll come out on it, but you look at the two generations since Kennedy, and it's basically been a downhill slide. To the point where you have a younger generation now where their minds are splattered. There may be some good kids in there, and some of them are trying to recruit, they may be bright, but their brains have been splattered. They have no future. They know they have no future. It's a dog-eat-dog world. You probably won't survive. And of course, they're educated by computer, which frankly, however spectacular it looks, they're mentally, decorticated. They can't think. They say, well, look it up on Wikipedia, or Google it. You say, what do you think of American history? They Google it. They get a Wikipedia version of what Leni's talking about. But even more, the situation among these kids. You look at, I think it's not insignificant. You look at this problem in the last, 6 or 8 weeks. How many shooter incidents have we had in the country?
Quite a few.
Okay, you had the Naval Yard, the guy was 32 years old. You had the woman who, they were paranoid schizophrenics. You know, they were hearing voices. They thought the White House was guiding their activity. Okay, so she didn't shoot anybody, she ended up getting killed. Then you have a shooter incident at Sparks, Nevada. You have an incident in Massachusetts where this 14-year-old apparently killed a math teacher. Okay, you have the 20-year-old down here in Paramus, New Jersey. Maybe he was, you know, sometimes it was, some of these cases are just a suicide. He just went out and wanted the cops to kill him. But of course he threw you know, this is, apparently in the last year, there's been about a dozen shooter incidents like this where 85 people have been killed. Now, obviously those numbers pale in comparison to a war. But you get this kind of activity being popped out of young people. It tells you a little bit about the social breakdown. And that's what's going on.
I was growing up in Europe, and in Europe you have all the different countries have been in wars earlier, set up by the wars created by imperial policies. So you have the Danes and the Swedes, they didn't get along. The French and the Germans, the Poles and the Germans, the Poles and the Russians. And I could go on because it's all the old wars, so there's a lot of fault lines in Europe. And then when I started going to Asia, I realized, wow, it's the same thing. The Japanese and the Chinese, the Russians and the Japanese, the Chinese and the Indians, the Japanese and the Koreans. There's a lot of tensions and fault line in Asia. That is all has been created through the years by the imperial policies. Set the nations up against each other, and you can sit outside and control the whole situation. So what our program is completely opposed to that of colonialism. It is based on the Westphalian principle from 1648. That is that your development is in my interest, the benefit of mutual development. And the idea is that all the nations collaborate on a common principle for mutual development, and that is the basis for peace. And this is not a new idea, this is an old idea. And this has also always been a nightmare for the imperial forces. Adam Brooks wrote a book in 1901 where he said, we must make sure that the land people, that the European and the Asians never succeed in developing the land in between. Because if they succeed, then we, the maritime powers, will have lost our power forever. So the efforts now, you probably heard about the air-sea battle strategy from the United States, where they want to involve Japan and the Philippines, Australia, all in an encirclement against China. And it is an effort to make sure that mankind gets reduced in population, as Phil pointed out earlier. I wanted to just read you a couple of quotes from yesterday's briefing, just to kind of underline what the oligarchy wants. Paul Ehrlich, who is a fellow of the British Royal Society, author of The Population Bomb, he wrote the following in April 2012. This was a comment to the London Guardian on the need to reduce population. Okay, here we go. How many you support depends on lifestyles. We came up with 1.5 to 2 billion because you can have big active cities and wilderness. If you want a battery chicken world where everyone has minimum space and food and everyone is kept just about alive, you might be able to support in the long term about 4 to 5 billion people. But you already have 7. Yeah, I'll just go through a couple of ideas that I think is important from, because what we did last Saturday was Lynn and Helga LaRouche basically did what Phil did now, setting the stage for the 12-hour conference concerning, as Helga said, we are hanging in a very, very thin thread. And Helga is a very optimistic lady, and she said, look, we need to have a miracle because that's how dangerous the situation is now. And I have worked with LaRouche since 1975, and I can't see a situation that is, because it's so complex and so many things that can go wrong and take a life on its own, as Phil went through. So what the conference concentrated on, as Michael Steger, one of the Young Policy Committee members, said, he said, look, this conference is about the future. But I want to go through just a few ideas, because as Phil said, there's no way, I would recommend, there's no way that we can just, and then this person said that, and then this person said that. You should go as soon, it's being worked on right now to put all the speeches up on the Paradigm, Schiller Institute Paradigm website, and then you can go in and watch for yourself. I just want to go through some key ideas, because we are really being seen in Asia and throughout the world, but I'll focus in on Asia now. The LaRouche movement in the United States is really being looked upon as the only hope. 1 billion. So we have to humanely and as rapidly as possible move to population shrinkage. The question is, can you go over the top without a disaster, like a worldwide plague or a nuclear war between India and Pakistan? If we go on at the pace we are, there's going to be various forms of disaster. Some may be slow motion disasters, like people getting more and more hungry, or catastrophic disasters, because the more people you have, the greater the chance of some weird virus transferring from animal to human populations. There could be a vast die-off. That was from April of last year. Or just one more from the Club of Rome, a fellow from there. From 1991, the first global revolution, quote, in searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. But in designating them as the enemy, we fall into the trap of mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. So just to put, this is what we are dealing with, and LaRouche has been very emphatic in the last several months that our policy, that the new future and our policy, and the more we can shift the situation here, the more there will be an echo in the rest of the world, and very much in Asia, where there is a lot of propaganda, for example, in China against the United States. It's the same as you have a lot of propaganda here in the United States against China. I think all of you have heard that the Chinese are really bad, right?
I thought that they're supposed to be united with Russia.
Yeah, but
China,
there's a
India.
lot of propaganda against the Chinese in the United States. I get it all the time about how bad the Chinese are. No, it's not true. but so one of the things I want, this is known to all of you here, I think, our proposal for a world land bridge, where all the blue lines, I think it's very important to emphasize, is like not just railroads, but it's 150 kilometers, 100 miles broad band of development, of new cities, of power generation, water management, and so forth, where we simply will be able to when we have corridors spanning all over, we'll be able to develop the land around. We'll be able to get the resources out, process them, and transport them, and we'll basically make the whole planet alive. And that program is an American system program to its core. It's anti-colonial, it's anti-empire. And one of the things that struck me when I'm